I had always imagined my wedding day as flawless. Instead, it turned into the moment I finally revealed my true self to my family. But to understand the drama that unfolded that day, you need to know my journey. I'm Emma Chen. Growing up, I lived under the constant shadow of my father's towering expectations. Chen wasn't just successful, he was a legend in the business world, having built Chen Technologies from the ground up into a multi-million-dollar empire. Every family conversation revolved around deals, mergers, and the legacy he wanted to preserve, a legacy I apparently wasn't worthy of joining. Business runs in our veins, he'd declare, beaming at my older brother, Marcus. Well, most of our veins. That last remark always came with a pointed look at me that made me feel invisible. Marcus followed the path my father mapped out flawlessly: prestigious schools, top-tier MBA, rapid climb to executive leadership. I chose a different route: computer engineering. My father's reaction was sharp and dismissive. Engineers work for people like us, Emma. They don't run companies. But I saw what he couldn't. While he clung to old-school business tactics, I understood that the future belonged to those who could create it, one line of code at a time. I graduated at the top of my class, but my father skipped my ceremony. He was too busy celebrating Marcus's MBA graduation. "Now that's an accomplishment," he remarked, without even a glance at me. For the next 3 years, I immersed myself in the tech world, hopping between startups and soaking up every lesson about coding and business. To my father, it looked like wandering. "When are you going to get a real job?" he'd ask at every family dinner, while Marcus was already climbing the corporate ladder at Chen Technologies. But behind the scenes, I was quietly building something extraordinary. From my tiny spare bedroom, I developed a revolutionary cybersecurity platform that could adapt in real time to emerging threats. While Marcus attended board meetings and golf outings, I coded into the early hours, powered by caffeine and stubborn ambition. The first prototype caught the eye of a small venture capital firm. Their investment allowed me to hire a couple of engineers and move into a modest office. My mother, during one of her rare moments of independence from my father, secretly helped me set it up. "I still don't really understand what you're building," she said as we wrestled with IKEA furniture. "Maybe not, but I've never seen you this alive," I replied. Over the next 2 years, my days blurred into coding, pitching, and growing secure core technologies. Our first major bank contract was followed by another, and eventually, a government agency quietly reached out. Despite my rising success, family gatherings remained a stage where I played the underachiever role. While my father boasted about Marcus, I smiled and nudged my food. When relatives asked about my work, I offered vague reassurances. Then David appeared in my life. Brilliant, creative, and grounded, he saw possibilities instead of limitations. He didn't care about money or status. The first time we met, he didn't even know who the Chens were. "You seem surprised," I said. "I am," he admitted. "You're not what I expected from a wealthy family. You're real." We fell in love through late-night talks about design, technology, and dreams. When he proposed a year later, I said yes without hesitation. Naturally, my father had his own opinions. "An architect?" he scoffed. "Couldn't you find someone in finance or business? Someone with real potential?" I tightened my grip on my fork. "David is already highly successful. His firm just won the downtown development contract." "A glorified construction worker," my father dismissed. "At least Marcus's wife comes from the right family. Her father's company is publicly listed." Looking at Catherine, my brother's perfectly polished wife, I felt a wave of pity. She was exactly the kind of woman my father approved of: graceful, obedient, and society perfect, attending galas and knowing which wines to serve. Serve at fancy dinner parties. Wedding planning had become a war zone. My father wanted to turn the celebration into a networking spectacle, filling the guest list with business partners and potential clients. My mother tried to intervene but ultimately yielded to him, as usual. Even Marcus cornered me one afternoon at the office. "Just let Dad have it his way," he said. "You know how he is. Besides, It's not like you're paying for it. But I was. Every penny came from Secure Core's profits, though no one in the family had a clue. They also didn't know that Secure Core had quietly gone public, and my shares were now worth $89 million. And that was just the tip of the iceberg. 3 months before the wedding, during a routine security check, I discovered something very interesting. Chen Technologies, my father's pride and joy, was riddled with cybersecurity gaps. These were exactly the kind my software could prevent. I could have warned them. I chose not to. Instead, I monitored the breaches carefully, making sure nothing catastrophic occurred, yet enough to rattle the board and drop their stock price. Then I started buying shares, anonymously through shell companies. By the week before my wedding, I owned 22% of Chen Technologies. My father had no idea that the daughter he had dismissed so easily was now one of the largest shareholders in his empire. The wedding day arrived bright and perfect. The ceremony was flawless, exactly as David and I had envisioned. But the real performance would unfold at the reception, when my father stood to give his toast. I sat at the head table, fingers entwined with David's under the crisp white tablecloth, watching him rise in his signature Tom Ford suit, the one reserved for closing the biggest deals. The room hushed. 200 guests focused on him, expecting the usual corporate polish. But tonight, something in his eyes was sharper, colder. When Emma was born, he began, voice echoing across the hall, I had high hopes. Our family's legacy in business is extraordinary. My father started from nothing. I turned it into an empire. And my son, Marcus, he gestured to my brother, who smiled smugly, is following that proud tradition. He paused to sip champagne. David's hand tightened around mine. But Emma, my father continued, chose a different path. Against our advice, she went into, he wrinkled his nose. Computer programming. A field for those who work for others, not lead them. A ripple of murmurs swept through the crowd. David began to rise, but I held him down. Not yet. And now, my father said, she's married an architect. His smile looked polite to outsiders, but I recognized the contempt behind it. At least he can design the buildings real business leaders will use. Catherine, Marcus's wife, stifled a laugh behind her napkin. A few business associates chuckled nervously. The truth is, my father continued, voice hardening, some people simply aren't destined for greatness. Emma will never achieve anything meaningful. She has been, and always will be, a disappointment to the Chen legacy. The room fell silent. Even those who had laughed moments ago shifted uncomfortably. My mother stared at her plate, hands clenched. Marcus's smirk was barely contained. I rose slowly, smoothing my dress. Thank you for those insightful words, Dad. I have a few things to share myself. I nodded to Michael, my chief technology officer, who had been posing as a photographer. With a press of a button, the massive screens my father had insisted on installing for his business slideshow flickered to life. What is this? He stammered, eyes widening at the display. The screens showed Secure Core's financials, rising stock prices, and most importantly, my stake, $89 million, all under my name. You see, Dad, I said, voice steady, while you were busy molding Marcus to run your empire, I was building my own. Secure Core Technologies. Perhaps you've heard of it. We're the team behind the adaptive cybersecurity system that now protects most major banks and government agencies, I announced. My father's face had gone ghostly pale. Marcus was frantically tapping on his phone, probably checking Secure Core's public filings. But that's not the full story, I continued, steady and calm. 3 months ago, we identified critical vulnerabilities in Chen Technologies' infrastructure, flaws that could have crippled the company if exploited by the wrong people. I gave Michael a subtle nod. Instantly, the large screens lit up with new data, stock transactions, board meeting notes, ownership stakes. I could have warned you, I said, walking around the table to stand in front of my father. Instead, I watched your stock price dip from minor breaches, and then, quietly, I began purchasing shares through various shell companies. Recognition and horror flooded my father's eyes. "No," he whispered. "Yes," I said with a small, satisfied smile. "As of this morning, I own 22% of Chen Technologies. And tomorrow, when the market opens, my stake will grow even larger." "Why?" "Because tonight, several board members, coincidentally ready to retire, have agreed to sell their shares directly to me." Marcus jumped to his feet so fast he toppled his champagne glass. "You can't do this, Dad." "She can't do this," he shouted. "Actually," I said, voice calm but firm, "I already have." I turned to face the stunned crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm thrilled to announce that effective tomorrow, Secure Core Technologies will begin merging with Chen Technologies. We will upgrade their security systems, modernize outdated infrastructure, and bring the company fully into the 21st century. My father finally found his voice. "You planned this. Every last detail." "I learned from the best, Dad," I replied. "You always told us to spot weaknesses, seize opportunities, and never reveal your hand until victory was certain. Consider this the ultimate lesson." The room erupted into chaos. Business reporters who came to cover a society wedding suddenly had the tech story of the year instead. My father's face turned crimson. Marcus looked like he might collapse. I walked back to David, who was beaming with pride, knowing every detail. He had been in on it for months, ready for the cameras. "Lead the way, Mrs. Chen Pierce, CEO of Secure Core Technologies," my father muttered, half in disbelief, half in awe. The aftermath exceeded even my expectations. Headlines splashed across every business outlet. Chen Technologies stock surged once investors realized Secure Core was at the helm. Marcus quietly transitioned to a non-executive role, while my father, well, his first board meeting under my leadership was unforgettable. "This is the security upgrade proposal," I said, sliding the documents across the table. "I'll need your signature by day's end." He studied me for a long moment, then picked up the pen. "You really did it," he said quietly. "You've built something remarkable." "Yes," I replied. "Without your guidance, without approval, and without walking your path. And that, I suspect, is what bothers you the most." He signed in silence. As he rose to leave, he paused at the door. "Your mother wants you at dinner on Sunday," he said. "I'll be there," I said, smiling. "And Dad, this time, I'll give the toast." A year later, Secure Core Technologies was valued at over $3 billion. My father remained on the board, now listening more than speaking. Marcus discovered his own path, launching a boutique consulting firm. Turns out he's better at advising than leading. And my mother? She finally found her voice at family gatherings. David and I bought a penthouse with sweeping city views but kept my original apartment, where Secure Core's first prototype was born. Sometimes I return there late at night, remembering the nights everyone thought I was wasting my time. The media calls it a revenge story, the underestimated daughter who took over her father's empire. But it's more than that. It's about building something on your own terms, proving that success doesn't have to follow someone else's blueprint. Just last week, my father asked for my input on a new tech investment. "You see things differently," he admitted. "You see the future." I looked out over the city skyline from my office, the very office that once belonged to him. "No, Dad," I said, voice steady. "I don't just see the future. I create it. And that's worth far more than any inheritance could ever be."